Welcome back. In this lesson, we'd like to build your knowledge of the two different modes of learning and give you some simple tips on how to help students practice in both modes. First, let's start with the focused mode of learning. The focused mode, you'll recall, is one in which students need to zoom in on the details of learning. For example, it might be learning from a vocabulary list, practicing a particular tense, or working on the pronunciation of a group of similar sounding words. Small things. Focused. Now, as a teacher, how would you help students tackle these kinds of assignments? Well, one of the worst things you can do when encouraging learners to memorize is to simply force them to sit down and try to learn everything at once. Some of my students insist that if it is good to learn 20 words in a day, it must be better to learn 40. And if 40 is great, why not 80 in one day? The problem with this idea is it gives no time for the brain to process the information. It is a little like believing that if you can bake a cake at 350 degrees for 1 hour, then you can bake that same cake at 700 degrees in 30 minutes. It'll save time, right? Of course not. If you double the temperature, what happens? You got it. Burnt cake. And if you double the amount of information, you may end up frying your brain. For your brain to truly learn words and keep them, learners need to allow their brain time to process the information. One great way to do this is to use spaced repetition. Spaced repetition is a particularly good technique for learners when they are trying to memorize lists. Rather than learning all the words at once and considering the learning finished, learners are invited to spend a limited amount of time with the material and then come back to it at a later time. Each time the learner comes back to it, however, the amount of time between intervals increases. This allows for the learning to stick and become more automatic. There are many different systems people use for spaced repetition, but one of my favorite systems for spaced repetition is the Leitner system. In this system, you practice items you haven't learned more frequently than those you have already memorized. For example, if I was studying vocabulary words on flashcards, words I correctly answered would go into a box with a higher number and would be studied less frequently, while words I incorrectly answered would go into a box with a lower number, meaning they would be studied more frequently. And remember, you don't have to come up with systems yourself. A simple Google search will reveal many different systems for spaced repetition, along with computer software and websites all designed to help you memorize things more quickly and easily. These software and websites usually let you create your own lists or look at lists other teachers have created. I like to look for lists that I know will help my students learn about a specific, targeted group of words I want them to know. And if you aren't into serious kinds of spaced repetition, here is an even easier tip. When you do practice of a particular group of words during a week of instruction, please remember to try to use those words in upcoming weeks. Just giving students lists, having students memorize those lists, and then leaving all that learning alone will simply cause students to believe that learning a language is nothing more than memorizing, taking a test, going home, and taking a shower that erases all that knowledge away. You know what I'm talking about. Don't do it. Recycle those words throughout the semester. Have them reappear throughout your time together. Now let's talk about the diffuse mode. To practice the diffuse mode in class, engage students in activities that move them beyond a list of words or a single rule. This means that you will need to zoom out and create general, not specific tasks for your learners. Creating a general task means you aren't asking them to perform a memorized bit of vocabulary or grammar, but asking them to perform in a more open style. For example, you could ask students to order at a restaurant, buy some shoes, or talk about your best friend. Do you see how these are more general tasks? Do you notice that in these tasks, there is more than one right answer, and that students could talk for a short or long period of time? These tasks could all include different kinds of grammar and vocabulary and invite learners to communicate in real, unscripted ways. At advanced levels of English, teachers often challenge students to think critically by asking questions that require students to synthesize, put together what they are learning. For example, by pairing two apparently unrelated ideas, you can invite students to consider how they might be related. Let me give you an example. The theme of our first module, motivation, and let's tie it to the theme of our second module, practice. I could ask you, advanced English speakers, a question like this: how is practice related to motivation? By taking these two separate ideas, practice and motivation, and asking students to put them together, you now engage students in not just language production, but critical thinking. Here, students will naturally focus away from grammar and from details of what vocabulary words they know, and focus on what they think, feel, and believe. Suddenly, they will get lost in the task and start speaking in a free way. Trust me, there is no more real context you can provide than asking students to engage in critical thought and serious reflection. Now you're talking. Can you think of any other times we have employed the technique of putting two unrelated ideas together in order to help learners think? How is language like cake? How is it like a camera? How is language like basketball? I think you get the idea. Thanks for watching.